Okay. Where'd our music go?
It's 6 o'clock, Mr. Fellers. I thought the meeting would be starting promptly.
Man, I was just getting going.
What was that? Clerk Gummow, was that your music?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman.
We were wondering where that was the source of that. Now we know.
Well,
thought-
it's like
I
us
thought
being
it
put
was
on
Dan.
hold. We might as well have some tunes while we're waiting.
The way Dan was dancing, I thought it was him.
It's a little too smooth for my style, Joe.
You're getting jiggy with it, though. I got to give it to you.
Wow.
Well, good evening, everybody. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. In terms of agenda updates, because we're on quarantine, there is an update that we were going to provide the board from the folks at the Mental Health Board. And that did not make its way officially onto the agenda because of, I believe, the quarantine situation in our office. I apologize for that. Nevertheless, there is not an official action item that'll be before the board. So we're within bounds, and I think there's a good opportunity here. Get a little bit of an update from the mental health folks. So we'll be adding that under presentations, see if you guys have any questions. If the board will indulge me on that, I think it'll be a good time to get an update now that we got the budget behind us. And again, apologize, that wasn't officially added to the agenda, but that's my understanding of it anyway. With that, I will ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mr. Salgado,
Present.
Mr. Schultz,
Present.
Mr. Tassoni,
Present.
Mr. Webster,
Here.
Mr. Westcott,
Present.
Mr. Zintak. Mr. Zintak, Mr. Arena,
Here.
Mr. Billich,
Here.
Mr. Booker,
Present.
Mr. Butita,
Here.
Mrs. Crosby, Mrs. Crosby,
Looks like she's having some audio issues.
Mr. Fellers,
I'm here.
Mr. Fiducia,
Here.
Mr. Girl,
Present.
Mrs. Gorel, Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Hoffman,
Present.
Mr. Kelly,
Here.
Mr. McDonald,
Here.
Mr. Neighbors,
Here.
Mrs. Red, Mrs. Red. Okay, I'm just confirming. Currently absent is Mrs. Crosby, Mrs. Gorel, and Mrs. Red, and
I'm
Mr.
present.
Zintak. I'm sorry.
Lori, can you hear me? This is Angie.
Okay, thank you, Angie.
Clerk Gummow, I just received a text from Ms. Crosby. She's having technical difficulties. She can see but not hear, but she is making an attempt. Please watch for her to join us.
Okay, I will mark her as present. So then That leaves Mrs. Rudd and Mr. Zintak. I'm confirming they are absent. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That would be 18 present and 2 absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gamow. With that, I will ask everybody to remain seated, but I will turn things over to Mr. Girl for the invocation and pledge. Mr. Girl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we pray for your blessings, your wisdom, as we need them now more than ever. We are facing a divided country with the divided ideologies. Please bring us together. Let us see the light. Let us see your wisdom. Let us see the way out of this. We pray for everyone that risks their lives every day to keep us safe. We pray for all our workers here at the county and throughout our entire region. We pray for small business owners. We pray for families that are struggling. We pray for the 211,000 plus that have died due to this virus. Please let there be no more. In your name, amen. And pledge allegiance to the flag
United States of America,
and to the republic for which it stands,
Stands
one
one
nation,
nation, under God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty
and
and justice
justice
for
for
all.
all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Girl. I do see that Mrs. Crosby has officially joined us. And Mrs. Crosby, I was not at the last board meeting, but did want to extend again my thoughts and prayers to you with the loss of your husband. And he was a good man. And I know a lot of people in the community would agree. With that, thank you, Mr. Girl, again for the invocation and the pledge. We'll move on to presentations. I see that the chair of the Mental Health Board, Marianne Abadi, has joined us. Thank you, Marianne. I see Dick Kunert is with us, and I believe Jason Holcomb, who is doing work directly with the Mental Health Board through our one, is with us as well. So, and I want to thank Mr. Neighbors for connecting me to make sure this got on before the board tonight. I know he's doing a good job serving on the Mental Health Board. So I'll turn it over to Marianne if you want to tee up the update. And then as we pass it around the horn to any of your teammates there, that would make as much sense as anything else. And there will be time for board questions after the update. Marianne?
Yes, Jason is going to share a PowerPoint that'll be a screen share coming up. But first of all, I want to say good evening. Thank you so much for having us. Myself, Dick Kunert, and Jason Holcomb will be providing information, actually a progress report, since the Mental Health Board has now been up and operating for 6 months. And we very much want to keep the county board apprised of our progress, as we're very proud of our accomplishments up to date. So moving forward.
Can everyone see the presentation on your screen?
Yes. Yeah. I think so, Jason. Okay, the highlights, I'm just going to run down our accomplishments in very brief outline. Begin with, in March, we had our inaugural board meeting. And at that point in time, Chairman Haney had appointed 9 board members. In April, the appointment of at-large board members, 2 additional board members were made by Chairman Haney, Dr. Julie Morris, and also Dr. Ed Copeland joined us. And I want to thank you very much for a board that is so committed and devoted to mental health and substance abuse efforts in our community. In May, we elected officers, and I'm very humbled and proud to say I was elected president, followed by Dick Kunert as vice president, Dr. Ed Copeland as our treasurer, and Danielle Angelari as our secretary. During the May meeting, we also were able to adopt bylaws. Moving on to June, we requested a presentation from Region 1 Planning Council as services were needed for our administrative tasks And they were kind enough to come and offer a presentation. We also, at that point in time, were able to develop an environmental scan framework and questions for the environmental scan, and that was approved during our June meeting. In July, we were able to develop a preliminary 3-month budget. And at that point in time, we also requested a loan from the Winnebago County Board, which was approved. And again, we are very appreciative because we were able to then move our administrative tasks forward. Also in July, the introductory service agreement with Region 1 Planning Council was approved. Moving into August, we then began the Region 1 Planning Council service, which allowed us then to move forward our environmental scan survey, which was developed and administered. And then we were also able to develop our webpage. In September, the Mental Health Board developed their FY21 work plan and were able to approve. Also, along with that, we developed our FY21 budget and approved that. We were also able to develop our communications framework and calendar. And we also developed our vision, mission, values, and principles statements, and discussion followed. During our October meeting, which was yesterday, the environmental scan results were compiled and presented to the Mental Health Board. And that is a big part of our presentation for you tonight. Jason Holcomb will present that, a summary of. We also approved our vision, mission, values, and principles statements and approved our communication calendar. So with that, with those highlights, I'm going to pass the next slide on to Dick Kunert, who will talk about our clinical framework model.
Mr. Kunert, you there?
I'm sorry, I apologize. Thank you for allowing us to come and make this presentation to you tonight. We really appreciate it. What you're looking at is the community support system. And during the campaign, when anybody asked us, if this passes and you get money for services, what will you do? And this is what our answer was, because the community support program, while it's old, as you can see, and been around, it's still best practice in the field of mental health. The 10 services that you see in that diagram, in that graphic, really are what research has shown over time that people need in order to survive. Mentally ill people, people with mental illness, and those with addiction need in order to survive within our community. So our target population was, in fact, those folks and children and adults in our community who can't function as the result of either their mental illness or their addictions. And that's what we're addressing. So tonight you're going to hear some of the material that we have gained, some of the data that has been developed, because when we put together our scan, this is what we used. We used this model. We checked within the community to look at the 10 services that were around, 11 if you include case management. And that's what we are going to be going forward to look at, develop our priorities from the gaps that we see. And that would then also drive what we would be funding. And with that, I'll let Jason share with you some of the material that we have gotten from our scan.
Thank you, Dick. So our environmental scan went out to a total of 123 cross-sector agencies, meaning that included nonprofit agencies, for-profit agencies, and public agencies. About 40, well, I shouldn't say about, actually 44 agencies completed that survey in totality. 8 partially completed it, and there were 2 who responded that they had kind of emerging services that were being developed and were not able to fill it out now, but would be able to fill it out in the future. So in total, we had a response rate of about 44%. Of those who responded, it was 81% who actually completed the survey, which resulted in a total completion rate of just over 1/3 at about 36%. This survey had something like 250 questions in it because there are so many components to the community support system framework. So we're pretty proud of that number of getting that many completions. And I think that again shows how committed the agencies in our community are to improving mental health services. I won't highlight every area of the community support system framework. As I mentioned, there were a lot of survey questions. The report that came out of that was about 325 pages of data. We were able to summarize that and narrow that down to a 20-page document. And I'm going to highlight just some of the key findings for you tonight. Treatment is a really important area, and it's probably what most people think of when you're talking about mental health services, because these are the clinical components of mental health services. So diagnostic evaluation, for example, is what happens when someone first presents with a mental health issue and a clinician makes a diagnosis and then tries to connect them with the appropriate services that are needed. About 30 agencies in total provide this service. About 1/4 of them have a waiting list, and 50% said that they offered same-day assessments. So the day that somebody showed up, they were able to assess them and diagnose them that same day. In terms of payment models, you'll see that private insurance is the highest form of payment accepted, and Medicare is the lowest form of payment accepted, with Medicaid sitting somewhere in between those two. About 2/3 serve uninsured, and a similar number provide low cost or sliding scale options. About 1/3 of agencies do not allow for any type of interpretation, and about only 1/4 of the agencies reported that they actually provide an interpreter for someone who's showing up for a diagnostic evaluation. So I think that starts to demonstrate a gap in service that you will see consistently demonstrated throughout many of these areas of service when it comes to accessibility. Supportive counseling is when an individual or a group or a family is meeting with a clinician to work through issues and symptom management and learn coping skills to manage their symptoms. Similarly here, 28 agencies, so comparing that to 30 that do diagnostics, similar amount that have a waiting list at 24%. You'll see a little bit of a discrepancy here in focus areas. So there's less providers that provide counseling for substance abuse than those who provide it for mental health. Somewhat significant difference there. Payments that's accepted is similar to diagnostics, with private insurance being the highest and Medicare being the lowest. One thing I'd like to highlight that was an encouraging surprise was the number of agencies in our community that are trauma informed. And I saw Dr. Martel on the call here jumping on. So I think that speaks to some of the great work the health department has done with the Trauma Informed Community Initiative. And we see that not only do we have 93% of our agencies that are reporting that they're trauma informed, but 3/4 of them actually provide trauma specific counseling. That is a really high number that we should be proud of as a community. Medication management is more of the psychiatric component. That includes not only the prescribing of medications, but also the monitoring of medications to make sure that they're properly being taken. So about 11 agencies provide this service, and you'll see that there's more agencies available for adults than there are for children. There's a unique thing happening here where we don't see the same discrepancy between private insurance and Medicaid, and you actually see those percentages being even. For interpretation, the percentage is higher at 46% who provide an interpreter, but because the agencies are lower in number, that's still a limited number of options because we're really looking at about 5 agencies when we're talking about 46%. So it's not a lot of options for someone who is not speaking English as their primary language. In terms of substance abuse services, this is inclusive of detox and other types of interventions that are very specific to alcohol and drug abuse. We see much fewer agencies here, only 8 agencies, and you'll see only 25% of them are mobile. So most of those are requiring the person to go to the office and not meeting them where they are. About 37.5% have a waiting list. So remember that 25% number we were seeing earlier, we're seeing that being a higher number on waiting lists for substance abuse. And we see that Medicaid number way lower at 28.6%. So we're seeing a lot less availability of services for substance abuse specific interventions. In terms of those services offered, really only 1 agency reported providing detox services, and we're looking at only 2 agencies with residential services or recovery homes, and a total of about 24 detox beds for that 1 agency that did report detox services. Some other community data that we use to contextualize some of the data that we were using includes a key informant survey from 2019 and a resident survey from 2016. And you can see consistently in the area of treatment, it's been noted the lack of availability of child psychiatrists, and particularly those that take Medicaid. In the crisis response services spoke here, we'll highlight just 2 components of that, even though there are 4 total components of that. So crisis outreach services are when a crisis intervention specialist goes out to meet a client where they are having their crisis and provides the intervention at the place the crisis is occurring. There are about 10 agencies that reported providing the service, serving approximately 165 individuals each day. We see that the payment models here might be a little bit different because we're seeing lower acceptance of Medicaid and private insurance. And some of that could be due to the fact that there may be other types of funding sources like public funding that don't require these services to be fee for service. So there's no need to accept insurance in some cases. The location where these services are being provided includes schools, county jail, primary care clinics, although that's notably low at 10%, and we'd probably like to see a little bit of a better integration between primary care and crisis intervention outreach services. Hospitals, homes, places of employment, juvenile assessment centers, and police stations. Interestingly here, about 50% of these agencies said they did work directly with law enforcement and jail diversion programs, but 90% of them reported that they did not believe law enforcement had adequate training to work with mentally ill and or addicted. And keep in mind that some of that response was coming from law enforcement agencies themselves. Crisis residential services include providing crisis intervention in the context of a residential treatment center rather than a hospital center. So some of the same services that might be in a hospital, but in a less restricted environment. And there were a total of 4 agencies that reported providing this service and serving about 157 people a day. One thing to highlight here is that only 25% of them reported providing interpretation, and that just means basically 1 agency. So there's limited availability there. And similarly for Medicare, only 3 agencies responded to the payment model question, and only one reported taking Medicare. So for our elderly population and retirees, that's their primary insurance, that creates a gap in service for them. Case management is a unique service area because, as you see, as that's highlighted, that part of the wheel connects all the other components of the array of services. So it's really important that we have strong case management services so that all the other services are being properly utilized and people are aware of them and getting connected. A total of 19 agencies provide this service. You see a pretty good balance of in-office versus mobile, a little bit more availability for adults than children. Payment models are a little bit low on some of those insurance forms of insurance, a very high number saying they take uninsured, but a very low percentage saying that they provide a low cost or sliding scale option. So that might create a difficulty with the expectation that somebody is able to pay the full price cash and not have that reimbursed in a different way. Interpretation services here were a little bit higher at 50%. With only 5.6% saying that they would not accept any type of interpreter, even if somebody were providing their own interpreter. So those numbers are a little bit better for case management. And just to show you some other community data, again, that helps contextualize that, looking at some of those same other surveys, we looked at some comments that people don't know what resources are available, and even that some of the service providers might not know all of the services that are available. Looking forward, as Mary Ann mentioned, the board did approve a fiscal year 21 work plan that outlines some key actions for the next year. And moving into October here, we're looking at taking all of this data that we've already started to analyze and now identifying some strategic issues and key focus areas. Providing an opportunity for public participation in November that will help us contextualize that and prioritize the strategic issues. And then in December, developing a 3-year strategic plan that identifies priorities, goals, and targeted outcomes. The goal is to have requests for proposals go out in January, to have a 6-week window for those to be received, to have those reviewed in late February and March, with awards being determined in early April and funding being administered by the end of April. So that is the goal. And with that, I will say thank you for your time, and any questions you have, please feel free to ask.
Thank you, Mary Ann and Dick and Jason. Just to clarify, I think at the end there, you said that in January, your request for proposals will go out and it'll be a 6-week process, give or take. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any board member questions or follow-ups?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead, Mrs. Gorel.
Will we all get copies of this that was presented to us?
Well, I see Mary Ann shaking her head yes, and if they get a copy to our office, we'll get that out to everybody tomorrow.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. Any other questions by board members? I don't see any hands up now, so I just want to again thank Mary Ann, Dick, and Jason for the update. Obviously, a lot of progress has been made in a short period of time, and a lot of work ahead here the next few months. So thank you very much for giving us some of your time tonight.
Well, thank you all.
Yeah, thanks very much, folks.
Have a good night. Be safe, guys.
You too.
Okay.
All of you.
Our next item of business, I believe, is public comment. We do have one speaker this evening. I believe that speaker is Elizabeth Lindquist. And let me read the disclaimer before I give Elizabeth the floor for 3 minutes. Comments shall be limited to 3 minutes. Speakers may not address a zoning matter which is pending before the ZBA, zoning committee, or the county board. Personnel matters or pending or threatened litigation may not be addressed in open session. An individual may speak a maximum of 3 times per calendar year on the same topic. This prohibition shall include the repetition of the same topic and a statement of what is purported to be a different topic. Personal attacks or inappropriate language of any sort will not be tolerated. With that, thank you for joining us. Elizabeth, are you on? There you are. Go ahead. You have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Lindquist. I am a current Roscoe Township trustee. I helped get the county executive referendum on the ballot for Winnebago County, and I'm also a candidate for the District 4 County Board seat. I am here to talk about the county executive referendum. I have been out talking to a lot of voters in the course of my election about what has gone on over the past couple of years, getting their thoughts about what kind of county government they thought we had, and how surprised they were when they found out that we didn't really have what they thought we had. Most folks I talked to thought that we had a county government that was kind of analogous to a mayor and a city council, where there was one county-wide elected official who had their, own independent political power, and that was more administrative or executive. And then there was the county board that was more the legislative body. I talked to folks about, and a surprising number of folks know about, the situation that occurred a couple of years ago when the board voted to strip the chair position of a lot of its power. And they were very dismayed by that. They weren't happy about that. And they really feel like it was affecting effectively affecting the outcome of the election by changing that position, the power of that position in the middle of the term. And they don't, appreciate that. So I've talked to them about that. I've talked to them about the county executive referendum. They very much appreciate the opportunity to weigh in and possibly make happen what they thought we had to begin with. I'm excited about that. I'm excited to have this referendum on the ballot. I know that this is about power. It's about controlling different arms of government, and power is very much about who the people who have it have to respond to, who they are dependent on. And I am dismayed that this board doesn't seem to acknowledge that their power is dependent on the consent of the governed, the people of Winnebago County, because not only did you try to keep the referendum from being on the ballot, but now we've got this resolution condemning the referendum. And this is really just about voter choice. This is about the people, and the power really is in the people, allowing them to have their say. And it's really concerning to me, and it seems to me that this board doesn't want to give up any of that power either to the people or to one county-wide elected official. I don't care what you call that person, doesn't matter what you call that person. They would have administrative and executive duties, but that person would be responsive and dependent on all of the people of Winnebago County. That's a good system. That's a system very much like we have it.
Okay, Elizabeth.
Oh, thanks. Okay,
You
sorry.
3 minute mark, so I got to cut you right there.
Okay.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you again. I believe that ends our public comment section this evening. We will move on to board member correspondence. Any board member comments this evening? Yes, Mr. Billick, I saw your hand up first.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would actually just like to take a minute to actually discuss a few things that have been troubling and bothersome with a lot of different individuals in our community. And one of the things that actually I've been working diligently on currently right now, it is actually sitting with State's Attorney's Office, I believe, as well, getting a resolution made. And I've spoken with many other members of this board, and I'd like to actually make it again to remind the members that I will be reaching out individually to all of you. What you have right now, I just want to bring up this whole concept of, the stage that we're in right now with everything that's going on with coronavirus and what the governor's orders were. Recently, I had a lot of people asking me the question in regards to all the restaurants and bars meeting when they had the meeting at Giovanni's, what was discussed and some of the things that were actually brought up as a concern to a lot of a very big, large group of this community that actually have been hit now, not only once this year, but now are getting hit a whole second time around, and what they're going to have to endure and what they have to live through and what they have to survive through. One of the biggest things is actually staying in contact with a lot of those restaurant owners and bar owners. Is they actually did reach out to different legal counsels because of the fact that they actually feel that they are being otherwise very, I guess, unfairly and unequally targeted. I just want to take a minute just to say this, okay, to a lot of the county board members, when this resolution does come up to show support for our restaurateurs and restaurant bar owners, to say that we are standing against them getting punished in regards to certain things that seem a little unfair and actually seem very unfair compared to other industries. If you think about the gas station industry, and if you look at the actual graphs and not just the gas station industry, but big box stores and other industries as well, and you look at a graph that was actually presented and put out by the IDPH, the sliver of transmission and cases that would come from a restaurant or a bar, where they include not only large corporate businesses, but also the smaller mom and pop establishments and locally owned establishments. The sliver of that pie, or the sliver on that graph, which you can actually look up on the IDPH website, is actually so small that it is small paled in comparison with just one other industry. We're not very high up on the list. We're pretty far down the list. However, we're the ones that the restaurateurs feel that they are the ones that are getting targeted very unfairly. I mean, if you think about it, you got thousands of people per day that go to a gas station, use the same gas station handle, touch the same gas station cooler door, and all that other stuff. And we're talking about thousands. Your local mom and pop shop could pray to see maybe 100 people for the day. And now they're actually getting pushed into this basically sentiment that they have to go out and spend a bunch of money on renting tents, professional commercial grade tents to put up, that they're going to have to heat during a windy and cold time. Had this come in at about summertime, it might have been okay and understandable. We had a lot of people within the restaurant industry that were okay with the fact that they had a lot of outdoor dining. They saw a huge spike in how much outdoor dining they have. They kept their tables outside, their patios open. So for them to have to go back now again during a colder time, and to not be able to allow as much people to sit inside comfortably where they have all their TVs and entertainment purposes, because a lot of people don't go out to the bars just for a drink or something like that necessarily either. They also come in for an entertainment purpose, which is being able to watch their favorite game while being served. It's a lot cheaper and to eat and drink at home. We all know this. So that's not the reason why they go out to the bars. They go out to the bars to gather. It is a social place, but at the same time, they understand that they have to socially distance, and a lot of the restaurants understand that they have to abide by those programs. However, cutting down to not having indoor dining, it's a huge drastic cut in a lot of that business, okay? Just the announcement alone, if you speak to any local restaurateurs, they can actually tell you, and bar owners especially, small mom and pop bar owners, when the announcement came out that the governor was going back a phase, they all saw a decrease, not just in the restaurant, but in the gaming as well, because people just assumed that they were going to close up. There are a few restaurants locally, there's about, I believe the number's up to 5 right now, that have officially closed up for good. So at this stage, we need to make sure that we're also listening to the public. If it took 5 or 6, 7 different counties in this whole region, the Region 1 area, that all met together under one roof in the city of Rockford, if that many could get together, I think that's a pretty big number for it to go unnoticed by the local leadership. So I just wanted to please urge you guys to help support the restaurant industry and the bar industry, and to understand that if the transmission was coming from us, we would be a lot higher on that list as well as on that chart. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Billick. Appreciate your comments. Mr. McDonald, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to hear from State's Attorney Height Ross really quick. We've heard that certain establishments have been hit one or served once and then received their second warning. Legally, moving forward, is this a law? Is this a recommendation? What legal grounds are there? There's even questions about if this is because it's an executive order after such a long time that it's not really enforceable. State's Attorney Height Ross, can you weigh in on kind of how things are moving forward from here?
I'm happy to reiterate what I previously stated. The courts have upheld the governor's executive order to impose restrictions throughout the state based upon the COVID-19 pandemic. I've also previously stated, and I will now reiterate, the authority of the Illinois Department of Public Health exists before the COVID pandemic. This authority derives from the state legislature. It gives the Illinois Department of Public Health the authority to ensure the safety and health of the community, and that includes any contagious diseases. This authority is outlined very detailed within the statute. Most often you might have seen it when maybe an establishment is closed, for example, a restaurant or a business which serves the public food and has unsanitary conditions. For example, the health department might inspect and find droppings of rodents within that establishment, and they have the authority to issue a notice of closure. There is due process that takes place in the courts. So what the health department tries to do, and this is also outlined in the statute, is to look at less drastic measures of closure. Closure is an absolute drastic measure. So the health department attempts to work with the businesses to come into compliance before issuing a notice of closure. I think previously, before we moved to before we moved back a phase, I think I only issued maybe 2 or 3 letters from my office. And the goal was to let the businesses know what the authority the health department had, and also to encourage the businesses to work with the health department to comply. Those businesses that were issued letters during that time frame did in fact work with the health department, and they did come into compliance. So I just want everyone to understand that is my goal. That is certainly the health department's goal. But I do want to reiterate that their authority is separate and apart from the executive order, and the fact that it existed prior to these executive orders. The governor has incorporated the Illinois Department of Health regulations in the executive order. So that is why you hear it referenced quite often, because he has incorporated it into his executive orders, but that authority exists independently as well.
Thank you. May I follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, thank you, Marilyn, and follow up by Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So once these businesses have been served twice or whatever, the health department decides, okay, you're still having people indoors. What happens after that? Is it a misdemeanor charge? Is it a felony charge? You know, legally, what are these owners and operators looking at if they continue to provide indoor service?
Go ahead, Marilyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to get into specifics. I can tell you that there are criminal charges that are at the discretion of the state's attorney that can be filed. Again, my goal is to work with businesses. There's also procedures where if a business is given a closure notice, then they have to be allowed to come into court within 48 hours to answer with the notice. That is the due process. So then the court would determine whether or not that business would remain closed, or whether they would be allowed to reopen. So there's a number of due process measures that are outlined within the statute. Yes, there are Class A misdemeanors. Yes, there are potential felony that could be filed against the business. But again, my goal is to work with the businesses. So I just want to make that clear. I did issue a statement on that earlier this week, because I think that we can reach and strike a balance where businesses want to remain solvent, but at the same time, we have to make sure that mitigation measures are enforced to protect the health of the community.
Thank you, Marilyn. Mr. McDonald, any other follow-ups?
No, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before I go back to Mr. Billick a second time, Pat, you wanted to jump in. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I was just going to ask a question of the chairman or the state's attorney. This is really not on the agenda, and we're getting into a lot of discussion on an item that really isn't specifically noted on the agenda. So I just don't want us to venture into open meetings situation. So I would suggest we agenda this item, and then we can get into a good debate on the issue.
You're suggesting we just add it as a agenda on the next upcoming meetings. Obviously, this topic is not going to go away over the next few weeks or few months. it's come up several times. It'll continue to come up. So agendizing it makes some sense. I appreciate it.
I think so, Mr. Chair.
And I'm good with that, but just so that we are clear, I was responding to
Right.
a legal question that was asked of me, which is why I'm here, Mr. Thompson. I do appreciate that. And I do agree with you that if we're going to go beyond my legal opinion, that we do in fact, put it and list it as a topic to be discussed.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Marilyn. A follow-up, Mr. Billick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry about that. No, I just wanted to say, yes, thank you for the answer there, Ms. Height-Ross, and thank you for the clarification, but then thank you, Mr. Thompson. I'll hold back any of the rest of my comments. My comment was just in general towards making sure that I bring awareness to the county board. If you look at the mitigation measures and you look at all the other different industries and you look at the traffic between other industries, please just remember and keep in mind that at the end of the day, we also work for the people, and the people are not very happy with what's going on right now, especially in an unfair treatment kind of atmosphere. So that's all I wanted to mention. That's it. I appreciate your time, and I'll be setting up a meeting to discuss more further on that. Thank you.
Just to follow up, Mr. Billick, you said there's some resolution that's being worked on at this time. That'll be coming through the committee process in the next cycle, you anticipate?
Correct. Sorry, I apologize. Yeah, correct. I didn't mean to interrupt. Correct. I have been working on a resolution. I've actually been in talks with with other board members on this regard, but actually I was hoping to have a resolution set before this board meeting, but it was not doable or attainable at the time. So I'll be setting a meeting, maybe even 2 meetings by next week to discuss that at length.
Thank you. Any other board member comments? Any other board member comments on any topics? Oh, yes, Mr. Fellers, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually just wanted to re-up on what Mr. Thompson said and remind this board that board member correspondence, the section has typically been used to when we receive correspondence from the public, letters, emails, things that the public has asked us to bring before the board. Over the last term, it's really turned into kind of a free-for-all of new business. And I'd highly recommend that we get back on board on keeping this to announcements from other community groups, from other events going on in the community, rather than just sort of an open discussion, so that we stick to our Open Meetings Act rules.
Thank you, Mr. Fellers. Mr. Billick, go back.
Mr. Feller is very well said. I understand what the correspondence is about. Consider this me announcing that there's a correspondence of more than 200 plus restaurant and other business owners that are all standing in unison together right now. So I hope you understand that, but I do exactly know what you mean, though. I agree with you.
Thank you, Mr. Billick. Thank you, Mr. Fellers. Any other comments by board members? I do not see any hands up. I do not have anything. Then moving on, Chairman's report. I do not have an update at this time, so we'll move to announcements and communications. Clerk Gummow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The items listed below were received as correspondence.
We'll go ahead and place those on file. Consent agenda. May I please have a motion to approve the consent agenda, which there is no raffle report for the record, but there is the approval of the minutes from September 3rd, 2020, and laying over of the minutes from September 22nd and September 24th. I have a motion by Mr. Hoffman, second by Mr. Fellers. Thank you. The consent agenda is now before the board. Any discussion? Seeing none, are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Thank you very much. Motion passes unanimously. And with that, we'll move on to the County Administrator's report. Pat, do you have anything to add?
Just a quick comment, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I think most of you are aware that our office is under quarantine currently, and it's been a very tough 2 weeks, and a senior member of our staff is currently fighting the coronavirus very vigorously, but our office should be back on Tuesday of next week, full staff, hopefully. A couple committee meetings that will be scheduled. We're going to need a Personnel and Policies Committee scheduled probably sometime next week to take up a couple insurance renewal items. And then also, I'm not sure which committee this will be, but there's something I wanted to discuss with the committee and then ultimately the county board. It's regarding the River Bluff Nursing Home, the consent decree. And I've been working with the state's attorney's office in reviewing that consent decree. And I think there might be some opportunity for the county to allow for out-of-county admissions to the nursing home. And that will greatly help our admissions for the nursing home. And so this will be an agenda item. I'm not sure which committee. I need to do a little more research on that, but that'll be coming hopefully to the board at our next meeting, October 22nd. It's regarding admissions at River Bluff. That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Next item is department head updates. I do know that, I'm sorry, Mr. Kelly, before we move on, follow up by Mr. Kelly.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I believe that would come before personnel and policies as well.
Well, that would be great. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly. The next item is department head updates, and I believe Clerk Gummow had an update she wanted to share regarding elections. And then we'll see if there's any other department leaders that want to share anything. Go ahead, Clerk Gummow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to give everybody a quick update. As many of you know, September 24th was the first day that we could drop mail-in ballots. And I'm very pleased to report we dropped over 18,000 mail-in ballots on September 24th. We're getting a lot of calls so you can respond to your constituents that I know it's been 2 weeks, but ballots are still being delivered. So ask your residents to be patient with the Postal Service. As you know, every other election authority in Illinois is doing the exact same thing. And the Postal Service is trying to get as many of these delivered as possible. We do have a drop box located outside the administration building that is clearly marked for ballots. We have already received about 1,500 returned ballots in that box. We have opened the third floor election room, and we average about 200 voters a day. So if you want to vote early, we encourage you to do so. It is open from 8:30 to 4:30 every day. We're in the process of setting up our offsite location in Loves Park, which will be at the Meadow Mart Mall. That will open October 19th. So people still have plenty of time to request a ballot by mail. They have plenty of time to return their ballot. And as long as their ballot is postmarked November 3rd, it will be counted. You should be very proud that you have very dedicated and experienced staff in the elections department. I'm relying on them, and they are working overtime to make sure that every single ballot is counted. Again, if people have questions, we have lots of information on our website, including a sample ballot. There's also a link to track your ballot. If you've requested one and if you want to know where it is in the process, if it's been received, we encourage you to direct people to our WinnebagoCountyClerk.com website. That can answer a lot of questions as well. So again, thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Chairman, to update the board on the election process.
Thank you, Clerk Gummow. I appreciate it. If there's any other follow-up questions for Clerk Gummow, please let me know. I don't see any. Any other department head updates? Seeing none, we'll move on to unfinished business. The unfinished business items are the board appointments that have been tabled since July 9th, 2020. Is there any motion that anybody would like to make to the board? Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chairman. I move to take the nominations off the table.
So we have a motion by Mr. Kelly, and I will infer that to mean to take the 4 appointments, recommendations off the table. The Community Action Agency appointment, the Winnebago County Housing Authority appointment, the Crime Commission appointment, and the Airport Board appointment. Is there a second? I have a second by Mrs. Crosby. So we have a motion, a second. The item is now before the board. The item is to take the motion is to take this off the table. So there's not the opportunity to debate the merits of the individual candidates. It's whether or not you want to take it off the table. So with that, I will ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mr. Schultz.
Oh, second.
No.
Mr. Tassoni.
No.
Mr. Webster.
No.
Mr. Westcott.
Not a chance.
Mr. Zintak is still absent. Mr. Arena.
No.
Mr. Billich.
No.
Mr. Booker.
No.
Mr. Butita.
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby.
Yes.
Mr. Fellers.
Yes.
Mr. Fiducia.
No.
Mr. Girl.
No.
Mrs. Gorel.
No.
Mr. Hoffman.
No.
Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
Mr. McDonald.
No.
Mr. Neighbors.
Yes.
I'm confirming Mrs. Red is still absent.
No, I'm here.
Oh, wonderful, Mrs. Red. I apologize. And your vote is?
No.
Thank you, Mrs. Red. Mr. Salgado.
No.
That is a no.
No.
That would be 5 yes, 14 no's, and 1 absent, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, motion fails. Thank you very much. Moving on to standing committee reports. I'll turn things over to Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are 3 items today. The first one is a resolution authorizing the settlement of a claim against the County of Winnebago entitled Michael Freet versus Winnebago County in the amount of $180,000.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Salgado on the resolution authorizing settlement between Michael Freet and Winnebago County in the amount of $180,000. May I have a second, please, Mr. Girl and Mrs. Crosby? Item is now before the board. Any discussion or questions? Seeing none, are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? I do not see or hear any objection, so I'm going to ask Clerk Gummow to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next item is a budget amendment 2020-024 County Highway FedEx fee transfer, and that's to be laid over. And then we have another item, which is 2020 tax levy ordinance to be laid over.
Okay, so we're laying over, we've passed 2, and we're laying over the budget amendment for County Highway FedEx transfer and the 2020 tax levy ordinance. Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Any other business?
That concludes our report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Next item is Zoning Committee, Mr. Webster.
We have no report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Next item of business is Economic Development, Mr. Billick. Mr. Billick, you there? I know he was just here.
He stepped away. I don't want to speak for him, but I don't think there is a report.
Okay, if he pops back in, we'll give him the floor for a second, but thank you, Pat. Next item is the Operations Committee, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've got a few resolutions for this evening. The first is resolution authorizing the chairman of the county board to execute a lease for space at 555 North Court Street with the Winnebago County Health Department, and I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. McDonald on the resolution regarding the lease of space at 555 North Court. May I have a second, please? Second by Mr. Hoffman. Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Any discussion or questions by board members on this lease? Seeing none, are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? Seeing and hearing no objection, I will ask Clerk Gummow to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes. Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next item is a resolution establishing the HVAC scheduled service agreement, and I so move.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. McDonald. Motion by Mr. McDonald on the resolution establishing HVA scheduled service agreement. May I have a second? Second by, looking for a second on this one. Thank you, Mr. Salgado and Mr. Hoffman. Motion a second. Item is now before the board. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, are there any board members opposed to this motion? Seeing no objection, ask the clerk to cast yes vote for all members present. I'll go back to, and motion passes unanimously. I'll go back to Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next item is a resolution renewing garbage collection services contract 178-2126, and I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. McDonald on the resolution renewing garbage collection services contract. May I have a second, please? Second by Mrs. Crosby. Thank you. Item is now before the board for the discussion or comment. Seeing and hearing no questions. Are there any board members who oppose this motion? Seeing no objection, I will ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Thank you very much. Motion passes. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next item is a resolution opposing the county executive form of government, and I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. McDonald opposing the county executive form of government. Second. I have a second by Mr. Arena. Mr. Hoffman, thank you very much. Item is now before the board for discussion. Mr. Butita.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So at last night's operations committee, I did indicate that this resolution to oppose the executive form of county government is somewhat redundant. I introduced a resolution, I believe last January, to put the referendum question on the ballot, and that was opposed by the majority of the board. So it's safe to assume that the majority of the board did not want the voters to have a choice in it. So I can assume that they are opposed to it. So it seems a redundant resolution in my mind. But more so than being redundant, I believe it's inappropriate, to be honest with you, for the county board to take an advocacy position for or against a issue on the ballot that directly affects the board seems inappropriate to me. And I got to assume that I believe the county or the state's attorney assisted in drafting this resolution, which is not uncommon. They assist in probably most or all the resolutions or contracts that we debate. So that's not an unusual situation. But I'm assuming that they've deemed that this resolution is lawful. I think it's inappropriate, but I assume that the state's attorney's office has deemed it lawful. And that concerns me, that the issue of executive form of government is not the only issue on the ballot that directly impacts the county board in the future. There happens to be contested county board races on the ballot. So my question would be to the state's attorney's office, can the county board pass a resolution taking an advocacy position on county board candidates? For instance, if a county board candidate opposes or is in favor of the executive form of government, could the county board actually pass a resolution lawfully to oppose a candidate? Is that possible?
Thank you, Mr. Petito. I'll go to the state's attorney.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. What does, this is a completely different topic than this resolution. Whether we can have advocacy on candidates for office, it has nothing to do with this resolution.
Mr. Arena, since I make the call on this, I guess I interpreted the point in which he's asking the state attorney for her opinion legally is the appropriateness of the resolution. And he gave an example. If this particular resolution is appropriate, then I think the thing is, where does that stop? And I'm not clear on that myself. I've never seen this type of thing. I don't know the answer. So to me, it's an appropriate question, the general question itself of, is this appropriate thing to be on a public agenda before a public body using a public platform, doing the people's business when it's already on the ballot at the same time? And if it's appropriate here, would it be appropriate for other things that are on the ballot? I guess that's why I think it's in order. And I'll go to the state's attorney on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that Mr. Kurlinkus had worked with Mr. Arena on that, and I believe that he had expressed to them it is appropriate to discuss the issue, and that is my understanding why it is on the agenda. It's just in the form of a resolution. It has no impact. It's no different than the previous resolution presented by Mr. Butita. And I'm looking to see if Mr. Kurlinkus is on with us, because he did, in fact, draft this and speak to Mr. Arena and Mr. Schultz regarding it. So I'm just looking to see if he's on for additional clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Dave, are you there?
I am.
Oh, okay. Anything you would like to add to the question raised by Mr. Butita?
Right. Well, it's completely different because you would be called on in a contested race to endorse one candidate or the other. This is a resolution that again, Mr. State Secretary Russ is correct. Mr. Arena asked me to help him put the verbiage together on this. It is a situation, I guess, where anybody who was in favor of this could have done the same thing. I'm guessing would have brought this up. Mr. Arena did indicate to me that what he wanted to do was to have a forum where the discussion could be about the two sides of this, and that's what was done primarily at the committee meeting last night. It was discussion of that. I guess I would say, what's the difference between this and one of your public speakers who came up and endorsed the county executive form of government tonight? It's the same thing. It's your whole county board meeting is a public forum. You are the representatives of the public, and you should have the ability, should you choose to, again, it's up to you, but should you choose to discuss this, it was on the agenda. So that's about all I have to say about that. I don't think it's improper at all.
Okay.
Follow up, Mr. Butita.
Yes, thank you. So I guess it's good for the clarification. I understand it, but the resolution doesn't say that the county board is going to debate this issue. The resolution says it opposes the county form of executive government. So, I think the resolution.
Excuse
I'm
me.
sorry.
Your process, though, after a resolution or an ordinance receives a motion or a second, is for discussion. That's precisely
Right.
what I think you're entertaining in now. You're engaging.
Yeah, I agree, but and I'm discussing. I believe it's an inappropriate resolution, especially since it's an issue on the ballot before the voters that directly impacts the county board. So, you take into factor the point that this resolution is using is taking an advocacy position against an issue on the ballot. It's using the county's time, the format that we use is paid by the county. It's administered by employees paid by the county. It used the state's attorney's office to help us assist in drafting it, with a county employee, all using taxpayer funds. I don't think it's appropriate that the funds of the county or the system of the county should be used as an advocacy to promote an item on the ballot. So now I do think this is inappropriate, but there is an appropriate way to handle this, I believe. And we have a great example in front of us. It turns out that we, as everyone knows, the executive form of government is not the only referendum question on the ballot. Also on the ballot is the fair tax amendment. And about 2 or 3 months ago, I received in the mail from the Illinois Secretary of State, and I'm certain that everybody else here did also, a notification that there was going to be a question on the ballot amending the state constitution. And it was a informative piece of information. It was instructed the voters on how the state constitution can be amended, the process they had to go through to get the question on the ballot, and it gave some detail as to how the question or the fair tax amendment will affect the government.
Point of order. Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Schultz.
Point of order. Yes, this again, Mr. Butita is taking up an entirely different topic than the one that is before us.
I beg to differ.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz.
Let me tie it together. Let me tie it together quickly for you, please. Is that what happened at the state level with that is the state used taxpayer funds to inform the voters, not to take an advocacy position. There was no advocacy position.
So you're not going to take a position on my point of order, Chairman?
Yeah, Mr. Schultz, thank you for raising it. I'm okay if Mr. Schultz or Mr. Butita is going to tie it with his point.
I'll wrap this up so that, the bottom line is there's an appropriate way to inform the voters as to what's on the ballot. And if they want to give a balanced approach to it, that I have no problem with. I believe that's appropriate. I believe it's inappropriate for this resolution to go forward as it's stated right now, just taking one position. So I would urge my county board members, fellow county board members to, no matter if you're in favor of executive form of government or if you're opposed to it, doesn't matter. I believe I would urge you to vote no on the resolution as it's written now. And if we really want to talk about doing something, then we should do something like the state did with the fair tax amendment.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Butita. Your objection is noted. And Mr. Kelly, you had your hand up. Go ahead. And then I have Mr. Arena.
I'll pass. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Thank you. I have Mr. Arena, then Mrs. Crosby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate Mr. Butita's concern on this matter. I know he has strong feelings about it, as do many of us. The purpose of this resolution isn't to sway voters in how they vote. It was to have a conversation so we could educate voters. And I think we can accomplish exactly what Mr. Butita suggested by allowing me to express my opinion, and then he'll express his opinions on why this is a better form of government. So with that being said, I'd like to move into a conversation on what this means. And also I want to say that I've been active in fighting against this. And it's not that I don't want the voters to make a decision on it. It's that all of us have seen situations where complex issues come to voters and maybe they not fully understand what it is they're voting on. And one of the points that was raised last night that I think we need to address tonight on this issue is how the question is presented to the voters, and it's done by statute. So I'm not saying that somebody tried to manipulate it in that way, but it incorporates the home rule. So the first thing that I'd like to make clear to people who are listening tonight is that this decision has nothing to do with home rule. I've been getting feedback from people who are confused by the ballot question, and that they think that maybe by voting yes, you're preventing home rule. By voting no, you're not. It has nothing to do with home rule. So everybody can just, it's a completely separate issue. If we wanted to have home rule, there would have to be a separate referendum. Secondly, the other thing that I think people are basing this decision on and causing some confusion, and we saw it with our first speaker tonight on this, is that it's necessary because we've gutted the position of chairman. So I just want to make it clear to everyone, I'm reading from our current ordinance as it exists today. I'm not interpreting what it is. I'm telling people what it is. Our chairman's duties are to appoint, with the consent of the board, positions required by law, represent the county on all economic development opportunities, represent the county on all organizations that we're a member, serve as the primary liaison between county elected officials and county board, monitor the development of annual host fee allocations, develop and promote the county's legislative agenda, assist in developing and monitoring the county strategic plan, lead communication of county board initiatives and accomplishments. That is a substantive list. There is a lot currently under the responsibilities of our chairman. What changes occurred over the last 2 years were focused on the operational control, the day-to-day operation. So what's happened is the day-to-day functions are under the supervision of a professional who is our administrator. The comparison has been made that this change to an executive form is similar to what cities have. Rockford has a strong council, weak mayor form of government. It's more similar to what we have now than the executive form. Many cities and municipalities operate under professional management with a city manager. So what we have today is not unusual. It's typical. 99 of the counties in Illinois operate in a form similar to what we have now, either the township form or a commission form. There are only 2 counties that have the type of executive form of government that we're considering here. So that's the purpose of all this, to give us the opportunity to make sure that the public understands that this is a choice between professional management of the day-to-day operations of the county or political management of the day-to-day operations of the county. The counties that have adopted this, one of them has no chairman at all. The other one has a chairman who is elected from within the board. So we're talking about replacing our administrator with this executive in function. Okay, let me make that clear. The duties that are assigned by state law to the executive are the duties that we currently have assigned to our administrator. I know people get confused by, the labels that we're putting on this, but we're shifting the duties of our professional administrator to an elected. And then whether we call that person chairman or whatever, it's that's the functional change. Those 2 counties that operate under this form of government do not have an administrator. So with that being said, I'd like to invite, the advocates for the executive forum to talk about why they believe that political management of our day-to-day operations would be better for Winnebago County. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arena, and Mr. Kelly, I believe you were next. Or no, I'm sorry, Mrs. Crosby, I believe you were next.
Thank you, Chairman. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, here we go again. The proponents of not supporting the executive form of government have made it an either-or equation. Either we have a chairman and we don't have an administrator, and that's not the case. The state statute simply says that the chairman can appoint with advice and consent of the board, so they would have to consent to an administrator, such subordinate deputies, employees, and appointees for the general administration of county affairs. So the chairman can indeed have an administrator. The mayor is an elected politician, and he has a full-time administrator. Secondly, township government, our township government, and there's 102 counties in Illinois, 2 of them have executive. And I'm going to look at that, and I have looked across the country, and many, many, many states have the executive form of government within their counties. We are behind the 8 ball. We only have 2. That doesn't mean it's a bad idea, although they would like to paint it as that. It's a good idea. And of our 102 counties, 2 are executive form of government and 17 are commissioners. So have a commission form of government. So you have to subtract that off. The other thing is we're all elected officials, Paul Arena. I don't have to have any criteria to be elected. I have to be a registered voter in the Winnebago County, and I have to be a resident for 1 year. That's the criteria. If you want that changed and put something else and more meat into it, then go forward and do that. But right now, the statute says you've got to be a registered voter and you've got to live in Winnebago County for at least 1 year. All of those things have been fulfilled. Another point I'd like to make, you had speakers come in last night to talk to the operations committee. One of them was almost a lifetime bureaucrat, which supported what you want to speak. The other 2 were politicians. They were elected, served on the county board, and retired. Let's talk about the jobs and responsibilities of the chairman. He has been stripped of all budgetary responsibilities, and he has been stripped of all hiring of department heads in the county. So I don't care what you say about all those other fluffy things. Without advice and consent from the board, he has nothing. Let's talk about tonight. He brought forward 4 appointments, advice and consent of the board for maybe the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th time. You've tubed all 4. So the county in this relationship with the chairman is very hostile, which brings me to my final point, I think. Of the 102 counties in Illinois, given the 17 that are commission-based and the 2 that are executive form of government, none of them, not one, has abused the powers that Winnebago has. None of them have taken the steps to take away the responsibilities and duties of the chairman. We did. And that's where the public is not served. The public needs to be able to trust their leadership, elect their leadership. The public needs to understand that they can trust their leadership and move forward. We do not want to have a bunch of, and I'm all for a professional administrator. Everybody should have a professional administrator, and counties around the country that have the executive form of government have professional administrators. So I am in total support of this, and I believe that much of what you say is half truths and not whole truths. And so I yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Crosby. We have a few hands up before I go back a second time. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chairman. Well said, Gene. I said it last night and I'll say it again. The voters will, it's going to be on the ballot, and let the voters decide. Let the conversation begin, and it has.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Salgado, did you have your hand up, sir?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to the resolution. I know Mr. Butita had a question regarding the legitimacy or the inappropriateness, but just would like to remind, the board members, last week, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Webster brought up about the farms, a pig farm coming out. The agriculture department from the state was actually going to propose that. It's going to come before them. There was a resolution in support or against the actual pig farm. So there's been resolutions out there in favor. I want to say the casino as well along I-90, if I'm not mistaken, was also a resolution that was brought forward for that. And there's another one too, I want to say, within Cherry Valley recently regarding, I want to say, pigs as well, of taking it up between zoning board to have discussion. It was brought down. So there's been support from this county board on different initiatives. So I just want to echo what Mr. Kurlinkis said. Same thing Mr. Butita could bring up, or Gene Crosby or Mr. Kelly, whoever wanted in favor, again, in favor of the ballot. And obviously it's going to take the votes up or down, and then we move forward. So I agree, let's have the discussion, but I just wanted to address that piece of it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Any other comments for the first time by board members before we go back to anybody's second time? Mr. Webster, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, can we call the question, please?
I went to Mr. Webster.
Yes.
Mr. Webster has the floor.
Thank you. Let me say this first, Angie. And what Jaime just said, actually, also was the resolution several years ago we brought before the county board opposing a railroad as it came through Winnebago County. And so this is nothing new for us to do this sort of thing. One of my other thoughts there now is that when we talk about two counties having the executive form of government, apparently it's a pretty good reason only two of them have the executive form of government, and all of the others, whatever form of government they have chosen not to be an executive form of government. They don't like the idea, apparently, of putting too much, I don't know, whatever in one person's hands. And then it was curious there that the comment was made, I believe Gene made it, I'm not sure, but I think Gene made it, said none of the other ones have, none of the other counties have made changes to their chairman's position like we have. Well, I don't know if that's true or not, but I can tell you a reason why none of them have, because they've never had to work with Frank Haney.
Point of order. Point of order. Personal attacks will not be permitted. Point of order.
Mr. Fellers, thank you for the point of order. Mr. Webster, proceed.
Yes, Angie made the comment about calling the question, and so I got in.
Point of order, Webster's only had his time to talk.
Please, so please call the question.
So
I'd like to speak for the first time.
As would I.
We have several people who would like to speak about an item that Mr. Arena said was a discussion about a topic, as much or more so than it's a resolution opposing something. But we have a board member who wants to call the question, who was next in line. So there we have it. So I would ask Mrs. Gorel to allow the conversation to continue, but Mrs. Gorel, you were the next person. I will give you the floor. Mrs. Gorel, I do not see on the call. Mr. Fellers, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the time. I'd like to bring up just a couple of things that were said here again about the appropriateness of this. First off, we do not have to pass a resolution or put a resolution on the agenda to have a discussion about an item. We have discussions all the time. Likewise, if we really want to have a good discussion about this, a public forum in terms of community involvement, inviting people from the outside would certainly been appropriate as well. I think this is just a back end way of ramming through an opinion that only a certain percentage, even if it is a majority of this board, feels about this. But to the other points that we have made, we have stated advocacy positions before. Let me bring up the point you mentioned: the railroad, the pig farms, the casino. I know there are a few others. None of those were ballot questions. Not a single one of those was a ballot initiative. And that's to Mr. Butita's point here, and I'm very concerned with what I heard from the state's attorney, that a ballot initiative before the, that is before the voters that directly affects this board should be in the form of a resolution in which we are putting any sort of opinion as a group. All 20 of us have the right to our own opinions, and we have the right to express those through social media, through our conversations with our constituents. But to do so as a group in which maybe 11 members out of 20 might say, yes, they support this, doesn't really reflect what's going on. And I'll just leave it at this. If I were running the social media campaigns of those in support of the county executive, all I would need to do is show that, look, the county board approves this. It must be a good thing, because that's how the public perceives us right now. So go ahead and vote for this if you want. It's just going to be used to give more people support and vote for this and put and have a county executive in 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fowlers. I apologize. I believe Mr. Schultz wanted to speak. Mr. Schultz, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of things. This public speaker tonight, I agree with Mr. Arena, was pointed in, is another person that is radically confused about what is on the ballot. So her comments related to the going back to the way things were by getting this executive form of government. And the reality is that that's not the case. We've never had this. And this would be an entirely new form of government for our county. And I think that just illustrates the confusion that's out there. I've had constituents emailing me, framing up the exact opposite of what this resolution, what this referendum would do, asking me for clarification and an explanation. And I've had to explain that it is exactly the opposite of what they think it is. And I believe that confusion is exceptionally damaging to our community. On the issues of this, I just think it's silly that we've gotten so much time on the appropriateness, but the railroad issue was actually on the ballot. There was a referendum on the issue, on the ballot. And as it relates to advocacy, there is no greater advocacy than county board members presently serving on this board getting this on the ballot. And I just find it exceptionally beyond ironic that the very folks who got it on the ballot are objecting to the conversation, trying to bring clarity to that. But circling back, the primary issue here is this is something we have not had in the past. And the public needs to understand that. It is a concentration of power in the hands of one person that we have never had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Schultz. I do see a couple hands up for the second time. I'll be happy to go back to them. I do think it's just a matter of clarification. A couple things. One is that the language that was in the chairman position in the ordinance of which I was elected and began my term actually had word for word language from the county executive. The fact that the county board back in 1992 set this up in a way that no other county I'm aware of, they created essentially a county executive using language from the actual state law that you will see on the books today. Much of that wording is and was the same at the beginning of my term. That is a fact. What is unique about Winnebago County is they set up a countywide elected chairman with executive duties via ordinance and not via referendum, so that the county voter did not set that in motion. That is one way in which we're different. I did want to point that out. Another thing I just wanted to point out.
Well, When you're done, Chairman, can you allow me to respond since you're responding to the items I just said?
Yeah, and secondly, Mr. Arena's point, and a very good one about home rule, I would say this is that it is clear that no county, with the exception of Cook County, has home rule. And regardless of the outcome, whether voters vote in favor of the county executive or vote against the county executive, Winnebago County will not have home rule come November 4th, the day after the election, regardless of outcome. It has nothing to do with home rule. In an inartful way, the state legislator put that in to make it clear it has nothing to do with home rule. What I would say, though, to your concern about confusion, the only piece of misinformation that I have seen about home rule has come from a former county board member, Eli Nicolosi, who I believe you're working with in this process of communicating with the public.
Point of order.
Excuse me, Mr. Arena, let me finish. Is that for anybody who's a former board member who was involved with chairman ordinance duty changes to make a comment that this affects tax rates or in any way affects home rule, as was asserted by somebody you're working with, I think is also inappropriate. So I'd appreciate, since you, like me, want clarity to voters, please make sure you clarify that to your friends, Mr. Arena. That would be very helpful.
No, my responsibility is not to control other people.
Arena, your objection is noted, and I will give you back the floor. I did want to go back to Mr. Schultz a second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just need to say for the record that it is very upsetting to me that on such a frequent basis, Mr. Chairman, that you use the bully pulpit of controlling the meeting to comment on so many points that are made by individual county board members. That is not your role. Your role is not to have a color commentary on the things that are said by individual board members, particularly swaying the conversation in favor of one particular side of an issue. But what my comment was is that when this item came and the board, for whatever reason, got it in front of the voters, the taxpayers, they had an opportunity back prior to 1992 to vote on whether they wanted the executive form of government. And after that failed, that's the point at which in 1992, the county board at that time ignored the voters and put together an executive position. So by ignoring the voters once, it doesn't make ignoring the voters twice an appropriate thing. But having a lack of clarity on what is in front of the voters is disturbing.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. I did see a couple other hands up. Is there anybody for the first time? Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is for Ms. Ross. Am I correct that the chairman situation has been litigated already?
Mr. Hoffman, you're kind of cutting out. Do you want to go ahead and hit your visual off, your video off, and then just talk? We could probably hear you better. So there you go.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. This is for Ms. Ross. My question is, this whole conversation seems to be revolving around what happened to the present chairman. Hasn't that case been resolved in court now?
No.
It hasn't been settled?
Yes, it has.
If I may respond.
Go ahead,
Mr.
Marilyn.
Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The State's Attorney's Office filed an appeal with the Second District Appellate Court. The court issued an opinion upholding what had occurred with respect to the actions of the county board. And I did send that out to all of the board members when we received it.
Okay. So my question is then, it appears to me the chairman has 3 or 4 members of the board that are acting as attorneys to relitigate this. And I'm wondering, why are we doing that at this late stage? We have a new chairman coming in soon. Why are we relitigating this? And why are the same 4 people always the ones relitigating it?
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Mr. McDonald and then Mr. Tassoni. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to weigh in right quick. Ms. Crosby made a comment about trusting your leadership, and I'm sure that the circle that she runs in has certain opinions. I know the circle that I run in, they also have certain opinions, and they speak favorably of the actions of this board. They seem to understand and agree with some of the decisions we've made in the past. The biggest reason I wanted this on the agenda tonight was to talk, because the way the question is written, and I'm not blaming anybody here, but it looks like it's directly tied to home rule. We've already agreed here that it's not. I understand that it is not, but I've had 8 phone calls so far asking about why home rule's on the board. They say, so we got to vote yes for this, right? So we don't get home rule. So they've completely missed the point of the question entirely. So I think it is very valid and important that in a public setting, as we have right now, that we can express that home rule is not tied to this question. The question is solely the executive form of government. And so because of that, I think it's very worthwhile to, I know the media is watching. I know other people are watching on YouTube. Home rule is not on the ballot. By voting yes does not mean you're going to avert home rule. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe it was close to 20 minutes ago when Mrs. Girl motioned to call the question. And I believe at that time, it was up for a roll call vote, whether or not discussion would continue on or we would call the question. I would once again motion to call the question. Thank you.
We got a motion by Mr. Tassoni to call the question, which would end discussion on this discussion. I believe that is a second by Mr. Hoffman.
Second.
And Mr.
Dorothy Red.
And Dorothy Red's a second. So we got a motion, a second to call the question, which would end discussion on this item. We will go ahead and
just a quick comment and point of order, Mr. Chairman. I believe the whole purpose of bringing this item to a resolution and to the board was to have a discussion on it. If that's not the case, why are people trying to call the question? Because we're trying to have an informed conversation so we can, inform the public. If you guys are calling the question, it means you don't want to inform the public because not everyone here has expressed all of their opinions on this. And this is just another end around so that the board can pass what many of us believe is an appropriate resolution.
So we have, thank you, Mr. Fellers. We do have a motion, a second to call the question. That is before the board. Now a yes vote would call the question, which would end debate. A no vote would keep it here for further discussion. And I did note and would note there were a few hands up of people that wanted to add more information. So with that, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll. A yes vote ends discussion.
Is this debatable at all?
No.
No.
Unfortunately, it is not per Robert's rules. Nobody's called the question more than the county board. So this is just the rules as dictated by Robert's rules. I don't like it either.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Mr. Kurlinkus.
Yeah, just a reminder, I believe this takes a 2/3 majority of the board.
No problem.
Okay.
Clerk Gamal, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mr. Tassoni.
Yes.
Mr. Webster.
Yes.
Mr. Westcott.
Yes.
Mr. Arena.
No.
Mr. Billich.
Yes.
Mr. Booker.
Yes.
Mr. Butita.
No.
Mrs. Crosby.
No.
Mr. Fellers.
No.
Mr. Fiducia.
Yes.
Mr. Girl.
No.
Mrs. Gorel.
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Hoffman, I think you're still muted.
No.
That was a no. Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Kelly.
It's been flogged to death. Yes.
Mr. McDonald.
No.
Mr. Neighbors.
No.
Mrs. Red.
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
No.
Mr. Chairman, that would be 10 yes, 9 no, and 1 absent, sir.
So the motion to call the question fails, doesn't have the required number of votes, so we'll continue the discussion. There were a few hands up. Mr. Arena, I believe you were next. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to respond to the comment that Ms. Crosby made about me speaking in half-truths. I just want to make it clear that the information I shared tonight was me reading the duties of the chairman that I took off our website today. So I didn't interpret it. I shared what's there. And that's what I think is needed here, that we're not providing enough facts to the public. It's a lot of opinion. And so Mr. Fellers made a good point that I mean, I don't personally care if we vote on this tonight and approve it tonight. I think what's most important is that we're educating the public, finding a way to get this clear in the public's mind. So Mr. Fellers said, you know, we should have a public forum where the public comes in and comments. And I think that would be great. We can do that. I don't know how we facilitate or make that happen other than by having a resolution like this debated by the board. Last night, we had members of the public who came in and spoke. Tonight, we had a member of the public come in and speak with the alternative point of view. So I'm open to suggestions on that and how we further the conversation among the public. And if that's not possible and we need to, you know, carry through with a vote on this resolution tonight, so be it. But I think that the community would benefit by getting a little bit more of the facts related to what this means and the impact on the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arena. Mr. Fellers, a second time, and I believe there was another hand up or two.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will say this, I support the county executive ordinance and and here's why. I think what's most important for the voters and for the residents of this county is to know that they've got consistency in government. This whole thing started 2.5 years ago when it came down to, who our administrator reported to. Right. If we really want to think back on this, to all these conversations that we had about this, it really came down to, does the county administrator report to a single elected chairperson of the county, which was the way the ordinance was written, as it was essentially copied from the state statute. And then to the other end of that, or does the administrator report, to 20 elected individuals, and how does that work? And how do we move, and what does that do in terms of, the county speaking with one voice or speaking with 20 voices, or overseeing that? End of the day, what this does is that it defines the role of executive and legislative and legal into their appropriate defined silos as permitted by state statute, right? The county board has one set of duties as it pertains to its standing committees, as it pertains to bringing resolutions through the process and enacting, and creating the policies and ordinances and resolutions that we all operate by. And the executive has the executive power, right? The ability to take what was done there and figure out the right way to implement it, right? It isn't just that, this board passes an ordinance and says, okay, yay, we've got an ordinance, or they pass a resolution and say, yay, we've got a resolution. It comes down to having someone on the other end to enact that into actual policy and functioning of government. Now, we have a county administrator that does that. And we're happy to have, that does that now. But ultimately, keeping those separate is what creates the sort of balance of power between executive branch and legislative branch. by, end of the day, will there still be a county board? Right? Of course, right? There will still be a county board and all the standing committees and all this kind of discussion going through. But then also, will there be someone elected by the entirety of Winnebago County who they know is responsible for taking what we did or what this board did, because I'm not going to be there, and making sure it is enacted properly through all the different departments, through all the different other elected officials, what have you. And ultimately, that level of consistency that is unchanging is what is going to make this a better government. It's going to make it a more efficient government, right? Where all of our roles and all of our duties are properly defined and can't be changed, in the event that you don't like someone, you don't like, the way it's going on. That's not for us. That is for the voters of this county, which is why I am supporting the county executive position. And I would encourage others to as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I see Mr. Billick, then I have Mrs. Crosby, then I have Mr. Butita. Mr. Billick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just because I don't take a strong point to this one. That's why I didn't want to speak on it too much, but I want to make sure that I make it known, just from my perspective, my standpoint, exactly what Mr. Fellers actually just said. And I respect Mr. Fellers very dearly, and very many of his arguments, he does make very valid points, but there's a few points where I disagree, and I will have to, obviously say it out loud. But one of the points that I want to make out actually is in regards to this in particular, this isn't a topic that I'm going to say that I took the forefront on, nor was I actually a big part of by any means whatsoever. And nor will I say that I actually know any more than any other individual that's on this board, especially Mr. Fellers is probably a lot more knowledgeable than I am. I will say just this one standpoint, this one ideology, and I just want to remind the board on this one, okay, is the fact that there's a lot of efficiency where you put a lot of power in somebody's hands. Yes, it's a lot more efficient when they don't have to respond to a lot of other people. However, the people deserve to have other voices. And the reason why we have multiple voices and many other voices and state officials and different officials and local officials and everything else, and there's layers to this onion, is because at the end of the day, I can tell you right now, one thing that I would never want to go back to is a government where you lost that voice and you only had that one person that told you what that voice is supposed to say or do. And because it's a lot harder to take that power away, you end up in a very bad position trying to do that. And it ends up making a huge mess out of things. I just want to point that out there. I'm not going to say anything favor or against whatever. I just want to let everyone know that from my discussion with a lot of constituents and with a lot of other people, with a lot of other individuals, and a lot of individuals that actually came from places where they had to fight that is their standpoint as well. So I just want to put that out there, okay? And that's all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Billick. Mrs. Crosby.
Thank you, Chairman. First off, let's talk about the half-truths. The half-truths goes to, if we have a executive, we can't have an administrator. That's a false statement. We can have both. The city has a mayor and an administrator. We can have the same thing. Number two, in operations last night, we had 3 speakers. One was almost a lifelong bureaucrat, and the other 2 were politicians, people that had served on the Winnebago County Board and no longer serve in that position. So these were individuals that would favor the arena point of view. Had they brought in a constituent or an individual that was unrelated to the politics of it all, it would have some credibility to me. But the individuals they brought in were company line. The third thing is the county board should not be managerial. We are legislative. I don't want to be involved in hiring and firing. I have too much going on in my life to be a part of that kind of, for lack of a better word, shenanigans. We need to have professional staff, i.e., which we have right now, and we need an elected official countywide to carry the same water. I don't want to be a part of that. And finally, in 1992, they put forward the executive form of government tied to home rule, and it failed. When it failed, the county board gave the same powers to the chairman that were described in the state statute. Gene Quinn served under that. Chris Cohen served under that. Christensen served under that. Haney, when he got in, they took it away. I am opposed strongly to that environment. In Haney's situation, it was personal. I heard Jim Webster say that Haney has a hissy fit in a committee meeting last night. When I hear that kind of language, it becomes personal. It's not about policy. It's not about governance. It's about personality. And so what happened to Haney was not about the office. It was about him. And it was about political retaliation. And I have and will remain opposed to that kind of governance. I yield my time.
Thank you, Mrs. Crosby. There are a couple hands up. I see several hands up, and I'll go to that. I would want to clarify for the record that the changes to the chairman job began right upon the eve of my election. And they obviously got momentum the last 2 years, but it was not a 2-year thing. To Mr. Arena's point, I want to clarify that it was a subject of conversation on a monthly basis on some level with some board members since on the eve of my election. Mr. McDonald, then I have Mr. Butita, and then I do know there's another couple hands up. Mr. McDonald, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Crosby raised last night, the people who spoke had a favorable point of view. And I want to touch on that. I'm glad she brought that up. I'd like to point out that in the times that the Chairman Haney can't make our meetings, he's got two Republican and a Democratic chairman that typically serve purposes, but when in his absence, Mr. Fellers fills in for him. Therefore, I understand why Mr. Fellers would carry the water for Mr. Haney. Ms. Crosby, when I was running against Mr. Boomer for caucus chair, Ms. Crosby said she's going to vote for whoever Mr. Chairman Haney says to vote for. So we can see a definitive pattern in the people speaking on behalf of the executive form of government in which circles they run in. And so I don't think it's fair to point out that last night we had this and tonight we have that. Everybody has a particular point of view. I think it's important that we put that aside and get out there that this isn't about home rule. A lot of people are confused about that. And that's what we really need to drive forward. It's I agree with Mr. Arena. We need to educate people, but 8 phone calls I've had so far is about this is tied to home rule because of the way the question is written. So I've said it last time and I'll say it again. Disconnecting it from home rule is important. Thank you.
Thank you for making sure that clarification gets out to the community, regardless of which side of the issue you're on. I think everybody that's spoken to that makes a very fair point. I apologize, I'm going out of order here. Mr. Butita, then Mr. Hoffman, and then I have Mr. Arena, and then Mr. Fellers. Mr. Butita.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of points I'd like to make. First of all, Paul Arena and I had the opportunity to have a sit in on a League of Women Voters forum last Saturday, where we were able to give presentations on both sides of the executive form of government, and that was helpful. Unfortunately, it was only 5 minutes per side, and this is a complex and confusing issue, so it was hard to make all your points. But and I share Paul's sense that of what he's trying to accomplish here tonight, in that having discussion, that is good. It's informing the voters. I'm disappointed in the wording in the resolution because at the end of the day, it says opposed. So, I would suggest, and I believe this is probably very doable, that, the county has the ability to set up a 30-minute Q&A or debate or a forum to discuss this, tape it, put it on the county website, put it on YouTube, so there's a point of access for the voters to become informed about the home rule component of this, about the pros and cons of executive form of government. So, I mean, I'd be thrilled to death if, we withdrew this resolution and we moved forward to do something like that very quickly. And I would assume that Mr. Thompson could organize that in very short fashion, that a couple of people's, maybe 4, the format doesn't really matter, but just as long as it's balanced. And that would be a service to the public, to the voters. So I would move that we move in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Batita. Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, Chairman.
We have a motion, Mr.
One thing
Chairman. We have a motion. Mr. Batita just moved a motion.
So Mrs. Crosby has a point of order. I take that as a point of order. I apologize, Mr. Hoffman. Hold on one sec. I didn't hear a motion by Mr. Batita. I heard a suggestion. That's how I understood Mr. Batita, is if it is in fact a motion to actually officially do something, I need that clarified for me by Mr. Batita. I would ask that we do, before we end anything, that we allow Mr. Hoffman to share his 2 cents. But I do want to, in fairness to Mrs. Crosby and the board, I want to get any clarification needed by Mr. Batita. Was that a suggestion at this time, or is it an official motion?
No, it was a suggestion. I believe if the resolution is going to be withdrawn, it should be by Mr. Arena. But in conjunction, I would agree with him wholeheartedly to work with Mr. Thompson to develop some format that we can have a discussion that for the voters. So it's not a motion, it's a recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Batita.
My apologies.
Thank you, Mrs. Crosby. Mr. Hoffman, I apologize. You have the floor, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I would suggest that Ms. Marilyn Height Ross speak. She's had her hand up, and I believe she probably has a lot more important stuff to say than I do. So I would defer to her.
I apologize, Marilyn. You had something you wanted to add?
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to go back to Mr. Hoffman had asked about, was this settled? And I think one of the board members said that this question of the board's authority had not been settled. So I did send the case out to everyone, but I did just want to read the portion in the 2nd District opinion that talks about the authority of the board. I think it would be prudent to the discussion that you're having currently. And basically, I'm reading and direct you to page 15 of that opinion, where the 2nd District Appellate Court says, as this section demonstrates, referring to Winnebago County Ordinance Section 2-50, effective November 24th, 1992. Long before the election of Chairman Haney and the development of his contentious relationship with the county board, it was understood that the exception of statutorily designated powers, the chairman's power, were the exclusive purview of the county board. It necessarily follows then that even were Chairman Haney vested with duties, powers, or functions derived from common law or historical precedent in general sense, the county board has the power to alter those duties at will, so long as doing so does not contravene the law. And so I just wanted to read that so that everyone understands the premise of the ruling with the 2nd District Appellate Court. And again, they're referencing your ordinance section 2-50. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Marilyn, thank you. And I appreciate you bringing that up. I think that's very important because that's the heart of the matter. I think one is, this is not about home rule one way or another. Whether you like home rule or not, this is not about home rule. 2, it is about, if there's a yes vote for county executive, the county board would not have the ability to make midterm changes. The power the county board once had, they'd no longer have. And the voters would have, the citizens would be setting forth a set of duties that would be protected by state law and would supersede any ideas of ordinance at the county local level. And that is the heart of the matter. I think you spoke very well to it. I think that is the heart of the matter. If the community would like the county board to be able to make changes as often as it sees fit going forward for the next chairman and the chairman after that, then vote no to the county executive. If you would like to see a set of duties set in place for a 4-year period that could only be changed by voters on a 4-year interval, if they chose to do something else, then you would vote for the county executive. And I think the home rule coupled with that cuts to the heart of what this discussion is. If the community votes yes for the county executive, the county board would be placed in a largely legislative role and placed in that lane, but would still have complete control, final say over the budget and ultimately administrative policy. I do appreciate you bringing that up. I apologize. Mr. Butita was up, or is it Mr. Hoffman had a question. He deferred to Marilyn. Is there anything else you had, Mr. Hoffman?
Yes, I just wanted to quickly follow this up. This is kind of a response to Ms. Crosby. When she said that there were several people who spoke yesterday, I think it was that, and I don't want to get the words wrong, but pretty much I think she was saying they're like political lifers or whatever. And I just want to say this. Under Mr. Arena, we had an ad hoc committee where we brought in a number of experts from Northern Illinois University at all fields, at the legal end, at the executive end, and every one of them spoke against the executive form of government. Am I correct, Mr. Arena? And so I just want to say, and this is the end of it for me, I'm done talking about it, that again, I'm going to say there's a reason only 2 counties in a big state like Illinois have that form of government. There's a reason. And my guess is after the next election, there'll only be 1 county that has it. Because I don't think, I believe it's Champaign County. I don't think it's too happy with it. So that's all I have to say. And there were experts that spoke on this. They weren't just political lifers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Butita, then was Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Arena, I think you had your hand up. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 things. In response to the criticism of the speakers last night, the former board members, the reason we had those gentlemen were to make it clear that changes like this had been done in the past with both Chris Cohn and Chairman Christensen. So it wasn't something that was, I guess, specific to the current chairman. It has been done before, and it didn't cause the level of chaos that we're in right now. And secondly, I welcome Mr. Butita's suggestion to work together to create a forum. I'm fine with that, and if Mr. Schultz is also fine with that, because this was not solely my initiative here, and I don't want to step in front of what he'd like to see happen. So I'm okay with tabling this for tonight and working with Mr. Butita on a community forum. I'd like to hear Mr. Schultz's opinion of going in that direction. Thank you.
Just so I don't have somebody point of order me, is that a motion at this point or just a suggestion for consideration at this point?
I would like to hear Mr. Schultz speak to the idea when he has the opportunity to talk. And if he's in agreement, then he can make the motion.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Arena. Any other hands up? Mr. Webster, second time, then we'll go back to Mr. Schultz, if that's okay. Mr. Webster, go ahead, sir.
Mute.
Go ahead and unmute yourself, Mr. Webster. Almost there. Bottom left.
The other left?
Just press your space bar.
We're all Zoom experts now. I love it.
I know the second I go to Mr. Schultz, he's going to get unmuted.
I don't know.
Okay, we're going to come back to Mr. Webster. Let's agree that we're going to give Mr. Webster the floor at some point before concluding the discussion, so we don't cheat him. Mr. Schultz, Mr. Arena wanted to defer to you, get your feedback. Anything you want to add, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm open to tabling the item and allowing for that open forum.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schultz. And assuming Mr. Webster's not ready to share anything, I do see Mrs. Crosby had her hand up. Mrs. Crosby, then I think Mr. Kurlinkus appeared off of the black screen to his profile. So I think that means he wanted to add something. I'll go to him after Mrs. Crosby. Mrs. Crosby. Oh, he does not have.
I'm going to second Steve's motion.
Oh, I didn't know he made a motion, but I think one is forthcoming. When a motion comes, I'll certainly count you in the second. Mr. Webster.
Okay, can I make the motion?
I think you want to see this motion go, so anybody can make the motion. You have the floor. I believe if
I'm going to make the motion that we table.
The motion is to table the resolution that opposes the county executive. That will allow for additional community conversation. I guess I'll be nebulous in that, so there's plenty of room for Mr. Butita, Mr. Arena, Mr. Schultz, and others who have the conversation as they see fit. But the official action that would move this item off of the board floor would be a motion to table. Am I saying this properly? Are we comfortable with the language? Mrs. Crosby, is that your intent?
Correct.
Okay. Is there a second? I see a second by Mr. Fellers and Mr. Kelly. So there's a motion and a second now to table this item to allow for additional discussion or dialogue between certain county board members and the community. Want to make sure I got the language and the intent and the spirit of that correct. That is before the board for discussion or question. I do not see any hands up on that motion to table. I have a legal question. I have never seen a discussion on an item on the ballot when, let's say, the city of Rockford had home rule. I know that's a word that has nothing to do with the county executive, but when there was a home rule discussion, once it went on the ballot before the voters of the city of Rockford, my understanding is there was ample discussion in the community involving city councilmen and women, the mayor, advocates, people in opposition, but that took place off of city hall property, off of city government property, not using an official city platform. That's my understanding how that went. Is that the expectation here, or is there all kinds of latitude?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. The motion has been made and seconded, and a table motion is not debatable.
If the intent is to have community discussion, I hope then if this passes and there's going to be that we're clear. That is a concern I have, and I just don't want a problem on the backside. But Mr. Fellers is right. There is a motion second to table. That is not debatable. That legal question will hang out regardless of, I guess, the outcome of this. That is a concern of mine. So with that, we are not able to debate whether or not to table, and we will ask the clerk to call the roll. A yes vote would table this item. A no vote would leave it here. Thank you, Mr. Fellers. You're right on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mr. Webster. Are you able to unmute, Mr. Webster?
Or give a thumbs up or thumbs
Thumbs
down.
up. Thumbs up or
go.
thumbs down?
Yes.
Thank you. That was a yes. Mr. Westcott.
No.
Mr. Arena.
Yes.
Mr. Billich.
No.
Mr. Booker.
No.
Mr. Butita.
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby.
Yes.
Mr. Fellers.
Yes.
Mr. Fiducia.
No.
Mr. Girl.
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
No.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors,
Yes.
Mrs. Red, Mrs. Red, can you unmute, please? I can come back to Mrs. Red. Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni.
No.
Okay, and I will return to Mrs. Red.
No.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, that would be 12 yes, 7 no, and 1 absent.
Okay, so the motion to table has passed, and we've tabled this item. Thank you for the discussion. Now that it is tabled, I do have a question for legal, and we don't have to get into it now, but I'd love a follow-up at an appropriate time ahead of something being formally scheduled involving county property, county platforms. I love the idea of a debate. I do wonder out loud when I've watched other taxing bodies go about referendums, about which is the proper platform and way to do this. Just so we're clear, I know there's a way to do it. Maybe there's a wrong way to do it. Maybe there's no wrong way to do it. So we're looking for some guidance as a follow-up outside this meeting for the entire board to review any thoughts you may have. With that, I'll go back. I believe this is a committee update. It's been a while since we've come back to you, Mr. McDonald. We're going to come back to the operations chairman, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do pray that this doesn't take as long as the previous. We have a resolution on county clerk hours 2020, and I so move.
We got a motion on county clerk hours. May I have a second, please? Second, Mrs. Crosby. Item is now before the board. Any discussion or questions on the clerk hours? Is there any objection to this resolution? I hear and see no objection, so I'm going to ask Clerk Gummow to cast a yes vote for the clerk hours. It passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you.
That concludes the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Public Works Committee, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just for a little bit of enlightened update, Bears are down 10-0. Your Public Works Committee brings forth 3 items this evening, none of which are cost to the county. I would read them all in and move to approve all. First item is 20-039. It's a resolution authorizing the award of a bid for Rockford Township for the resurfacing of Blackhawk Road between Illinois 251 and 20th Street. Second is an ordinance 20-040. It's an establishing a park speed zone limit on Wendy Lane from Harrison Avenue to Heidi Drive in Cherry Valley Township. And third item is a resolution 20-041. It's a resolution authorizing the installation of a stop signs at the intersection of Wendy Lane and Darlene Drive in Cherry Valley Township. And I would move to approve all and speak to them as well.
Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. We have a motion by Mr. Tassoni to approve items 2, 3, and 4, a resolution, an ordinance, and another resolution. May I have a second by Mr. Kelly and Mr. Girl. Those 3 items are now before the board for discussion. If a board member would like to split one of those items out, if they're going to vote differently on one than the others, speak now or forever hold your peace. If not, we will absolutely take them all together. I do not hear anybody wants to split anything out, so we'll take them as a package. Any discussion, any questions by board members? Mr. Tassoni, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a little review and overcap of this. The first item, 20-039. It just passed through dollars for the county administrators for the townships. It's for Rockford Township resurfacing of Black Hawk Road, no cost to the county. The other item is 20-040, an ordinance establishing a speed zone limit from Wendy Lane, Harrison Avenue to Heidi Drive. That's in Mr. Girl's district. It's agreeable to Cherry Valley Township. They're requesting a speed zone limit in that area. And the third and last item is requesting the installation of stop signs at the intersection of Wendy Lane and Darlene Avenue, and that's in Mr. Girl's district as well. And all these items passed unanimously in Public Works, and none of them are a cost to the county.
Thank you for the information, the synopsis. Any other discussion or questions by board members? Yes, sir, Mr. Girl, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to speak to the two that are in my district, these resolutions came about after meetings with the neighborhood folks that live off of Heidi and Wendy Lane over there. Earlier this summer, there was an accident involving a small child and a vehicle at the intersection of Darlene and Wendy. After that incident happened, the child is okay. The driver probably will never be okay mentally, but after conversations with the residents over there, these were some of the quick actions that we could take to effectively affect change in drivers over there and make it a safe place for the neighborhood. So I would appreciate everyone supporting these two ordinances, and I'm sure the residents and the children that live over there would appreciate your support also. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Girl. Appreciate your comments. Any other discussion by board members? Again, we're looking at all three items under Public Works together. Okay, we'll go ahead and vote. Are there any board members who are opposed to these three items? I do not hear or see any objections, so I'll ask Clerk Gamow to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes our report.
Thank you, sir. Public Safety Committee, Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got two items to bring up. I know there's one on the agenda. The other one is very, very quick. It's a Sheriff's Department update, but our Court Services Division has been extremely successful in securing these grants from the Department of Justice. So this is a resolution approving subcontractor agreement for the Department of Justice Violence Against Women grant, and I so move.
We have a motion by Mr. Booker on the resolution approving subcontractor agreement for the Department of Justice Violence Against Women grant. May I have a second, please? Mr. Fellers, thank you. Mrs. Crosby, thank you. Item is now before the board for discussion or questions. I do not see any or hear any. So with that, we'll vote. And are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? I do not see or hear any objections, so we will ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The others, again, a very quick update from the Sheriff's Department. For the month of July, for federal inmates, we took in $216,000 for the month of July. The month of August was $252,000 that we brought in for the month of August for federal inmates. And for the month of September, we've brought in $277,000 for the month of September. We're up to 130 federal inmates. Everything looks good, and no matter how you put it, it's a good revenue source. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Booker. Appreciate your comments. Personnel and Policy Committee, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one item for personnel and policies tonight, and this is going to be a reconsideration. And the reconsideration is going to be to declare November 3rd, 2020 as a holiday, and I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. Fiducia on the resolution to declare November 3rd, 2020 a holiday, which is Election Day, and that is a reconsideration. A second by Mr. Fellers. Item is now before the board. I want to clarify something since I misspoke in a communication to the board, and I apologize. When I said that this was the governor's mandate, I was incorrect. This was an action taken by the General Assembly, and I was, Mr. Kulinkas pointed that out. I just want to be clear in my communication to the board that this is something that came from the General Assembly at some point in the distant past. So I apologize if that, although it was going to be reconsidered anyway, I just want to clarify that. I do see a couple hands up. Mr. Fellers, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question to either the administrator or the state's attorney. As this came from the General Assembly, I mean, it sounds like we're required to make this a holiday, and if we so choose to swap it with a different holiday, we can do that. But it sounds like our hands are tied on this one. I don't think we had a good conversation about that last board meeting. If we get some clarity, that'd be great.
Pat, is there anything you'd like to add? And then I will definitely go to the state's attorney. Pat, anything you want to add?
Well, my interpretation of the legislation is that it states very clearly that all government offices shall be closed on November 3rd. So it doesn't specify state office, county, or local office be closed. It says all county government offices shall be closed. And so the courts, Judge Doherty has already ruled that the courts will be closed on November 3rd. And my recommendation to the board is that we comply with the state legislation that has been passed regarding closure on November 3rd. Now, the question that some board members may have is whether or not you have an option to not comply. I would probably say that maybe you do, but I don't think that's the right decision. I think the right decision is to comply with what the state has mandated or said legislatively, that all government offices shall be closed on November 3rd. So I don't think it's an argument or a fight that we want to take. I would recommend that we comply and we close all government offices on November 3rd. That's my recommendation. If we have an argument or we just don't agree with it, I don't think we need to debate amongst ourselves on this issue. I think we need to discuss this type of issue with our state delegation. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. I'll go to the state's attorney for anything they want to add. Marilyn?
Thank you, Chairman. As we had discussed when this was previously in Mr. Fiducia's committee, this is a state law. Obviously, as your legal counsel, I'm going to advise you to follow state law. After this was voted down at the last meeting, I did send out some information to the elected offices. So this is a state law. To answer Mr. Feller's question, you don't have an option. And I will always advise you as your legal counsel to comply with state law. And all government offices shall be closed. That shall is mandatory language. It's not optional language. My office will be closed on election day.
Thank you, Marilyn. I did see, Mr. McDonald. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, if the governor's office says that we shall be closed, why is it necessary that we take action, either condoning or supporting? Why does this county board have to take any action at all?
Okay, first of all, it's not the governor's order. It is a state law passed by the legislature. Secondly, because we meaning my office was getting inquiries from different elected offices or county offices wondering what was going to take place on election day, and their staff wanted to know. I suggested that the prudent thing would be for the county board to pass a resolution so that everyone understood the position. And so that's how it came to you. Mr. Kurlinkus did speak with Mr. Fiducia and then drafted the resolution also in consultation with Mr. Thompson and Mr. Chapman. So that's how it came to be before the committee originally and then brought before the board.
May I follow up, Chairman?
Yes, absolutely, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Chief. So I would, again, I'm in favor of following state law. I don't want to give my opinion on whether we should or not, because I don't think we should. I think it's an unfunded mandate. I think the law says that we have to allow people to go vote anyways. But I would just rather not take action on this because I don't support it. The state of Illinois says we have to do it anyways. I don't want to give, I don't support it, but at the same time, I want to stay in compliance with the state of Illinois. Thank you.
So, just so I'm clarifying, just so I'm clear, so nobody point of orders me, was that a suggestion, Mr. McDonald, or is that a motion to table?
That was not a motion. That was merely my feelings.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Webster. There you go.
Thank you. Keith just mentioned about not wanting to take action on this, and it came to mind to me there that generally everything comes through committees before it comes to the board. And this didn't come through the committee. We didn't have a committee meeting on this. You don't see any signatures on the resolution there. And so I don't know how we could even be, voting on this tonight. I mean, obviously, I think it's a crazy idea anyways, to do this. And I did look into this, and true enough, yes, it is a law. It is not a mandate. And so I had asked that committee there before, and I'd asked at caucus actually about who supported this, who brought this forward and so forth like that. So I looked into that as well. And I asked the question about did our local legislative body, our representatives, how they felt on this and voted on this. Well, what I found out there is that our 6 guys that represent us in Springfield, 4 out of the 6 voted no on this. 2 voted yes. And so that kind of fell in line with what our general feelings were at our caucus meetings and even at committee meetings about how we felt about this. So at any rate, getting back to this resolution, we didn't have a meeting about this. So how did this come before us?
Yeah, point of clarification, I believe it went to the Personnel Policy Committee. Mr. Fiducia, is that correct?
Yes,
No.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, so it came out of committee. It was brought to the Personnel and Policy Committee and came out of committee to the full board. At the last board meeting, was voted down narrowly. Then when I received a lot of feedback from other folks, other elected officials and that, I was asked even by a county board member to just bring it back for reconsideration. That's the process.
Yes.
I know it, Mr. Webster.
Yeah, yes, thank you. And I understand that too, Frank, but it's written up as a resolution that came out of Personnel and Policy Committee.
And
Yeah.
it did originally come out of that committee, Mr. Webster.
Pardon me?
It did in fact come out. It was taken to the Personnel and Policy Committee, was voted out of committee to the full board, where it was acted upon unfavorably at the last board meeting 2 weeks ago. So it did come
Yes,
out.
I'm on,
The process was followed, is my
I'm
understanding.
on Personnel and Policies. I'm on that committee,
Oh, okay.
okay? So I'm aware of that. We dealt with that at Personnel and Policies. And so then we moved that forward. But now the resolution, that was a separate resolution than what's before us right now. So the resolution right now is for us to walk this back. And that did not go before the committee.
We're merely reconsidering what we voted on 2 weeks ago.
Correct.
That's all the board is being asked to do tonight.
Yeah, so you've got the reconsideration as a resolution.
That's okay.
Yeah, point of
That is
order,
how
Mr.
we brought
Webster.
back their items.
A reconsideration does not need to go back through committee. it goes back to the full board.
Yeah. So it's my understanding, and I'm comfortable, and it's actually based on how we've done it on other reconsideration. Listen, I was asked by board members and elected officials and the chief judge to rethink the position and just give the board a little more additional information. That's this. This isn't my hill to die on. Mr. Webster, being honest with you, I wish this wasn't an item we were dealing with. I think there's politics behind it at the state level. That said, it is a state law. I was asked to bring it back. I agree with Mr. Thompson's recommendation, but there's no effort here with me on anything. I was asked to bring it back. I brought it back. That's equivalent, but it was listed as a reconsidered item, and it was brought back exactly how it was left 2 weeks ago. I don't think there's anything procedurally wrong. If the board wants to do something different with it, it's the board's prerogative. If the board wants to table it, if they want to vote it up or down, that is the board's prerogative. It is in the lap of the board at this point. And again, I say that respectfully to the board's process. I have Mrs. Crosby, or Mr. Webster, did you have a follow-up, sir? I apologize.
No, I just want to thank you for having this discussion there. And Mr. Fellers is pretty good on these sort of things there. So I'm eager to hear from him as well. I've said my piece about how I feel on it. And the only thing I wanted to bring up was I didn't know about the mechanics of bringing this up again without going before the committee. Thank you.
Fair. Thank you, Mr. Webster. I have Mrs. Crosby, then Mr. Fellers. Mrs. Crosby.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, we got to bite the bullet on this thing. None of us want grievances filed against us. It's state law. We got to live within it. Doesn't matter how we feel. Marilyn Height Ross is correct. It's what it is, and we're going to have to adopt it. So I would like to very much call the question. Sorry, Dan Fellers.
If I could, Ms. Crosby, if you would, I have one additional point to make to this, just because
Okay, go
there is
ahead.
something else to it.
So Mrs. Crosby withdraws her call the question motion. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mrs. Crosby. I just want to add one more thing here, because our holidays are actually stated out in our ordinance, chapter 62, article 6, division 1, 146 actually designates our holidays. So I would actually recommend that this board do two things. Number one, pass this resolution tonight so that we communicate clearly to county employees that Election Day is a holiday. However, I think we're also going to have to comply with state law, go back and actually amend the division, the 62, 146 and our holidays to include that in there, so that it's actually part of our ordinances. And I would recommend that that goes through personnel and policies as soon as possible, again, so that we are in alignment with state law. Thank you, Mrs. Crosby.
And I would still like to call the question.
So thank you, Mr. Fellers. We have, I do see Mr. Tassonia's hand up, but I do have a motion. I have a couple of hands up, but I got a motion by Mrs. Crosby to table.
No, to call the question.
Excuse me, I apologize, call the question. Is there a second on the call, on the motion to call the question? I see two hands up, Mr. Booker and Mr. Kelly. We have a motion, a second to call the question, which I guess is non-debatable. And so with that, I will ask the clerk to call the roll. A yes vote would call the question. A no vote would leave it before the board for discussion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mr. Westcott.
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
Mr. Billich had to leave.
thank you. Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Mr. Fellers,
No.
Mr. Fiducia,
Yes.
Mr. Gurl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gurl,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
No.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
No.
Mr. Webster.
No.
So, Mr. Chairman, that would be 14 yes, 4 no, and 2 absent.
Thank you. Motion to call the question is passed. 14 positive votes, yes votes. So with that, the motion before the board now that we will take immediate action on is the resolution to declare November 3rd, 2020 a holiday. Clerk Gamow, a yes vote passes and makes that a holiday, and a no vote does not. Go ahead, Clerk Gamow.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start
A
with,
point of order, Mr. Haney, on your comment there, whether we vote this yes or no, and let's not confuse people, it's still a holiday.
Thank you,
I
Dan.
know what you're saying, Mr. Fellers, thank you, but a yes vote would pass, a no vote would mean that the board is not passing the state law. Clerk Gamow.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich is still absent. Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Mr. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Fiducia,
Yes.
Mr. Girl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yeah, it's just like prevailing wage, yes.
thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. McDonald,
I disagree with Mr. Kelly. I'm a no.
okay, thank you. Mr. Neighbors,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
No.
Mr. Webster. Thumbs up or thumbs down, Mr. Webster? A simple thumbs up or thumbs down, Mr. Webster? Simple thumbs up or thumbs down, Mr. Webster?
Sign language, Mr. Webster.
I think that's a thumbs down. Thank you, Mr. Webster. Whew. Mr. Westcott,
No.
whew, that was a tough roll call, Mr. Chairman. It does pass 14 yes, 4 no, and 2 absent. Thank you all for your roll call.
Thank you, Clerk Gamow. Mr. Fiducia, we'll go back to you. Motion passes. I'll go back to Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's going to conclude our report tonight, but I have something quick I need to bring up to the board. Mr. Thompson brought up the fact that we're going to have a personnel and policies meeting. When we do that meeting, I'm going to be talking with Mr. Salgado, reference the River Bluff situation, because Mr. Salgado and I decided that this is such a financial burden on the county that we need to have a joint committee meeting on that. So I will be talking with Mr. Thompson and Mr. Salgado, reference that, and I would urge everybody on this board to keep an eye on your email and attend this meeting. I don't know if it's going to be Zoom or in person. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. Any new business by board members? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Tassoni on the motion.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, yes, sir. I'm sorry. Mr. Tassoni, go ahead.
Not necessarily new business, if I could speak to this, maybe on unfinished business, but I would just like to let it be known to this board and to yourself, sir, that I take a bit of offense that in some instances, as you being the administrator and moderator of this meeting, that you would allow discussion to take place for upwards of 20 or 30 minutes when a question has been called on an item, but then on other matters, call the question and let it be over in moments. And I take offense with that. And I would like you to know my displeasure with the past vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stoney. I would take offense too, except Mrs. Gural never made that particular motion. I believe you thought she did. I meant no disrespect, but I could understand how you would think that if that actually happened. So I apologize for any offense taken there. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. I had a motion by Mr. Feller, second by Mr. Booker and Arena. Any board members opposed to adjourning? Have a good evening. Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Another fun one.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.